Welcome, thank you all for coming. We are asking Governor DeSantis to stop the executions and to work to end executions in Florida altogether. Yesterday, Louisiana had its first execution in 15 years and became the second state using nitrogen suffocation as its execution method. Now we see legislation here in Florida and in other states to expand the death penalty, to expand the number of ways we can execute prisoners. That's why we wanted to bring our message today that the thing that needs to be doged is the death penalty. The most inefficient government program that exists is capital punishment. It's not stopping any such murders, but it's traumatizing and re-traumatizing the victims in these cases. This bell that we have here, we call it the Delaware Bell, and so far this bell has been tolled at the state capitals in Alabama, in Indiana, in Louisiana, and now here in Florida, that encourages communities of faith to toll their bells in sounding out opposition to the death penalty. People have signed this from all over the world, people of faith, people who are deeply concerned about government overreach and fairness in a legal system, just folks that are concerned about the state being able to take life in all of our names. And we're standing in opposition to all executions in every state and also under the federal government. But we are hopeful that the petitions and the prayers that come with them from millions of people all over the world, even Pope Francis, is that will touch the heart of Governor DeSantis, and he will move on this issue and turn from his evil ways and stop setting execution dates and work to abolish the death penalty in Florida and in the nation. Executing somebody before their natural death is a violation of many of our ethics, and we need to stand up and say it's wrong every single time. And welcome. It's Sunday night, June 1st, and this is the forecast. I'm Abe Bonowitz, and Executive Director of Death Penalty Action, and I'm glad to be with you all tonight from New Mexico. I'm at my father-in-law's house in New Mexico. We're here for his funeral and helping his wife clean everything up, but I'm grateful always to be back in New Mexico, also because in 2009 we abolished the death penalty in New Mexico, and this is a state that has no executions. It's the land of enchantment, and it's an abolitionist state, and I'm grateful to be talking to you from within an abolitionist state as we approach a month of another round of unnecessary executions in cases that each of them has egregious injustices to talk about, and that's what we're going to be doing tonight. I do want to say that we're going to have a number of guests from a number of different organizations tonight. Everybody is speaking for themselves unless they're specifically a staff or board member of Death Penalty Action. Also, this is a safe space for everybody that's here. We are against the death penalty, and should there be any disruptive behavior in the chat, either on the social media or here in the Zoom audience, then of course such people will be summarily dismissed and without warning. So there's that. Anyway, I'll share with you my screen here. Let's see if I've got it set up right, and I do. If you get to deathpenaltyaction.org, this is where you'll find the petitions for the upcoming executions, and we've got these 4 here all in the same week, one in Florida, and then an hour later in Alabama, and then 2 days later in Oklahoma, and then 1 day later in South Carolina. We're going to be talking about these as well as the cases in later in the month, an execution in and another one back in Florida, and then in Mississippi. And this is where you can sign the death penalty action petitions, and we encourage you to do that, as well as within each of our petitions, we'll link to whatever state organization petition exists for the if there's other action opportunities. We try to make sure to list those within our petition, because when we all do better, we all do better, right? And that's the goal, is create opportunities for people to take action. We're going to be talking about that tonight too. And normally what we do is we go in order of the executions. I saw that Bridget was here a moment ago. We also, I think we're expecting Grace, both, let's see, there's Bridget and there's Jeff. And that's another interesting thing that we're going to hear about in a moment, is that Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood is the spiritual advisor for both men that are being executed within an hour of each other on June 10th. So there's some more insanity for this month. But in any case, let's start out with Bridget Maloney, the Communications Director for Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, to fill us in. And Bridget, maybe you can talk about both Florida cases, and just that way we'll have Florida checked off for tonight, and then we'll move on to Alabama. So welcome, Bridget Maloney.
Wonderful. Thank you, Abe. And I'm actually, if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to pass it over to Jeff for most of Anthony. I just want to say about Anthony's case that it has serious implications for everybody facing execution across Florida. And most importantly, Anthony is a human being who is very, very loved. And we are coming up on 9 days before his execution. We will be doing an in-person petition delivery. Please continue to sign it, make comments when you sign it. We read those and make sure that others, when we deliver them, can read them. Many people in the administration, even when we can't reach the governor, we find somebody and find a way to get it to someone who at least matters enough to get our voices heard. And it's important that every single time we do this. And for Anthony, because his state council has been so incredibly ineffective and refuses to challenge his death sentence, now more than ever, the public pressure is incredibly important. So please take please take action for Anthony and sign his petition. And we also have a letter writing action available for Governor DeSantis. Before I continue with another execution coming up in Florida, shall I pass the baton?
Yeah, that's
Please.
fine.
And also put the links to the FADP webpage and everything in the chat now, and we'll copy them over to the social media. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. It's good to be joining you tonight. I'm on my way to Florida this week. The next 10 days promises to be incredibly difficult. Anthony, well, I guess before I speak directly to Anthony, this week I'll be going back and forth between Florida and Alabama, trying my hardest to minister to both men, Anthony Wainwright and Greg Hunt, and to be there and be present for both men, and to engage these different meetings and different moments. Next Monday, we will be doing petition delivery at 9 a.m. The 9th, Monday the 9th at 9 a.m. in Alabama, and 4 p.m. In Florida. And I'm thankful for both Project Hope in Alabama and Floridians for Alternatives for setting those times, because that would have been the only way I could have made both. So yeah, I think that I guess I need to begin by saying, yeah, I'm under a lot of stress. It's very exhausting, very tiring, but I count it a tremendous privilege to have a deep and abiding relationship with both of these men, and to get to be present for them, for both of them. Particularly with Anthony, Sam, his wife, and I were talking this afternoon, and believe it or not, I actually knew Sam, his wife, before I knew Anthony. And so I've been working with Anthony going on 3.5 years, almost maybe even closer to 4 years. He is very near and dear to me, somebody that I care about very much. And he is incredibly kind, generous, thoughtful, and to some degree incredibly generous, not just with his spirit, but also with his words and his affirmations. Anyways, this is a situation that we have seen over and over and over again. Number one, this is not someone who it's going to make any difference to anybody if he is executed. Even those who think that they'll receive some type of closure, we know that that's not true. Number two, we know that there are a lot of people who truly care very much about Anthony, um, and it will make an incredible difference to them. For Sam and our family, they will certainly be devastated. I think I also wanted to speak quickly to where Anthony's at. We spoke on Friday, and he wanted everybody to know that he is fighting, he's pushing, he remains hopeful, but at the same time, he remains in resistance, if you will. And what I mean by that is that he is not taking an attitude of I just want this to happen. He very much is pushing back and wants his lawyers to push back. And I think that also brings up something that Bridget alluded to. Certainly, Anthony has had lawyers that have helped him and that have pushed for him. And I think that there are, like I've said repeatedly, there are tremendous lawyers out there, great federal defenders, great offices, great people. But I think that what we have seen in recent days in Florida is that Anthony's longtime sort of attorney that's known for um, being involved in cases that just they want to rush through the system and pass through the system, not someone who's known for giving a whole lot of effort for any of these guys, blocked. This gentleman's name is By Harrison, blocked this pro bono attorney that came in, who's a really great attorney, a retired attorney who had some work on Anthony's case previously. And the Florida Supreme Court said that the appeals that she was filing could go forward, but that Anthony's other attorney, the longer time attorney, I guess, would have to agree to it. And the attorney that wanted everything to be over with did not agree to it. And the Florida State Supreme Court threw out his what was his final state appeal. And I won't belabor the point, but I think it's important not to call people evil. We don't want to monsterize those, in other spaces who function, who make mistakes as evil. In the same way, we don't want to monsterize the guys that we work with or we engage with. But I think it is very important to state unequivocally that there are very evil actions that are taken by some attorneys that do nothing but cause destruction and strife and lead the guys that we work with, many of the people that we love, quickly to the gurney a lot quicker than they would have been, perhaps if they would have been given the right legal counsel. It is it is absolutely 100%. Katie Thompson just said unconscionable. I think that's putting it nicely. Problematic. I just saw that come across the chat. I think that's putting it nicely. I think these actions are tremendously evil. With that said, I think it's again very important to state Anthony has great other attorneys who are working hard. We see attorneys giving everything they got for many guys, but I think that we must get to a place where when things like this happen, we are not afraid to say this is evil. And it doesn't mean that there can't be some sort of grace and there can't be some sort of forgiveness and some sort of redemption and regeneration and moving to a more positive space. But I think it is very, very important that when things like this happen, we respond in the same way that Maria's wonderful email did for FADP. So I guess that's for right now. That's all I have about Anthony. Please keep Anthony in your prayers. Keep his wife Sam in your prayers. His sister Carly. It's going to be a very tough few days, but I do think with God's help we can push through.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you.
Reverend. Thank you, Reverend Hood. And I apologize everyone for my appearance right now. I literally got off of a plane 10 minutes ago, and Bridget texted me, so I decided to hop on. But
I think you look great.
Thank you. I'm holding up my phone on my
Great.
steering wheel right now.
And Grace, can you introduce yourself? I was going to introduce you, but you jumped in. So
sorry.
Welcome.
Yes.
And hopefully you and Bridget and Jeff can also share just some of the actual case issues that would be argued if about Anthony Wainwright and also the other Florida date, in addition to this controversy that we're all watching.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess really what I was hoping to speak about is I think that this case and the lawyering issues in this case have really brought my attention to something in Florida death row politics that I wasn't really aware of before, which is this concept of registry attorneys. So Maria Deliberato, our executive director, I'm on the board of Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and our executive director sent a beautiful email this week explaining kind of the history of how capital representation works in Florida. And I think it's really important because I hear a lot of people jumping in and saying this is wrong, this is bad. And yes, it is wrong and it is bad. But I think that the context behind like why this happened is so important. There's also a book called Among the Lowest of the Dead that describes the history quite well. But essentially in Florida, the capital defense system was working too well. So the governor, not our current governor, our previous governor, decided to get rid of it and instead switched to this system of private attorneys on a registry. Now, eventually, the Florida Supreme Court, I don't remember the exact wording, it's in Maria's email, but the Florida Supreme Court said it was among the worst lawyering they had ever seen and abolished the registry system. But those on death row who already had been assigned a registry attorney kept their registry attorney. So Anthony Wainwright still has his registry attorney, who under Florida law is the primary counsel on his case. So this other attorney who is wanting to take the case actually can't until the primary attorney signs on. It's really an example of bureaucracy just like working at its very best to deny justice to someone and deny someone due process. And I would just encourage everyone to kind of keep an eye on it and see what happens in the days ahead without previewing much. But I think that this case potentially has significant impacts for anyone's right to counsel in the state of Florida. So, and Bridget, if you want to speak a little bit more about the case and also about Tommy Godinez's case, which is our second execution coming up this month.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, both of you, for your wonderful comments. I don't know how I could follow either of them, but I think that in Anthony's case, there is a very strong federal claim, but many of the people facing execution have strong claims that are I mean, they're disregarded by the Florida Supreme Court, they're disregarded by the federal courts. It, it is much larger a function of the system, and particularly Florida's system is arguably one of the most broken. And the fact that we have 30 death row exonerees is not, just because of bad evidence or things like that. It's also because of bad lawyering, and it's not always on the prosecutor side. And I'm one person who went to school for law, thinking about lawyers who weren't doing what they were supposed to do. And I think it's incredibly important to call it out the same way that you would in any other profession, because these are lives at stake. But I don't want people to think that it's necessarily over. There is still a fight in the federal courts. They will be filing this week. I wish I had more information on the claims, but I do know that it will have to do with the fact that he was deprived counsel. And Florida, it would have been no cost to Florida for Anthony to have the counsel of his choice that Jeff was saying. The counsel that was already filing, pro bono counsel, there was no cost and no delay in the case. So there was no reason for the Florida Supreme Court to deny it, other than the fact that they didn't want this lawyer to do the claims. And that's because the other lawyer didn't want to do any claims. And obviously that's much easier for everybody involved, except for the person who's about to die. So I wanted to note that. And then I will be brief because I recognize that it's late, but we also have another execution scheduled for Tommy Godinez. And he was sentenced to death non-unanimously by a vote of 10-2. So for a few recent executions in Florida, we have had unanimous verdicts, but we are now back to having non-unanimous ones. He is responsible for a horrific crime, and like many others in his situation, he had a horrific upbringing, and his legal filings have just begun at this point, so they're at the trial level. They will basically be arguing that he has an intellectual disability, that because he was only 20 at the age of this crime, that impacts his ability for reasoning and understanding, as well as the jury issue. But there is something that I wanted to note about his case, and sort of just generally, is that when we talk about the brokenness of the people being executed, it should never be taken as an excuse as much as potentially an explanation. I very much believe that people not only are not defined by the worst thing they've ever done, but are human beings from when they are born to when they die, or are murdered, or are executed, or any of those things. And if we ignore what has happened to a person just because of something they did, it takes away humanity from us. And it's uncomfortable to see what people have been through. And it's uncomfortable to see a same story over and over and over again about someone who was badly abused and deprived of the things they needed growing up, and turning out to do a horrible thing, especially when most others who have suffered horrible things do not grow up to do those things. So I just wanted everybody to sort of recognize that, like, it does not negate the fact that this crime is horrific, and that every single one of these crimes is horrific. And how could it possibly be true to say that one is the most heinous or the most atrocious, when these are human lives? And the whole reason that we're here against the death penalty is because they're human lives, and they should be treated that way. So that is my kind of stump speech about that. But what you can do for Tommy now is please sign the petition. What we are trying to do, as we have back-to-back executions, is use as much sort of attention and discussion about one case to then get stronger and stronger for the next. This will also be Florida's, and Grace actually will have to probably correct me because I've said this so many times, but I'm so tired of thinking it will be probably tied if it's 7. Yes. So it will be tied for, it will be higher than Governor DeSantis's record before, but it will be tied for most. And then after that, it will be the most executions in Florida's history.
Yeah, Florida has been going at an unprecedented pace.
I might be off by maybe one, but it's getting faster and there are getting more. So please do whatever you can. Join Death Penalty Action, join us, and just keep. It might sound like we're fighting Goliath because most of the time I just feel like I'm screaming into the void. But I promise that the bigger we get and the louder that we get, eventually it's going to move someone who's going to move someone who's going to move someone who's going to move someone, and we will stop this. It might just take longer than I would like it to, because I would like it to be tomorrow.
Yeah, I think, and then I'll hop. I what Bridget said about it not being an excuse is absolutely correct, and that it might be an explanation. And one fact about Tommy's case that has just stuck with me, is that before his 18th birthday, Tommy was in not 10, not 20, not 30, not 40, not 50, not 60, not 70, not 80, not 90, not even 100. Before his 18th birthday, he was in 105 foster homes. And when you take a child who has never had a stable home and they become an adult and we say, wow, why did they become dysregulated and commit crimes? It makes me say, maybe this is our fault. Maybe we failed this child. And that fact has just really stuck with me. And I urge everyone to just keep it in mind that this is more than being, one person committing a crime, a horrible crime, right? That the failures that led to this man being on death row really began 40 years ago or more than that.
Hey, Abe, I wanted to jump in real quick before we moved on. I want to say, I think I would be remiss if I did not say that I feel like Maria de Liberato has shown as much courage this week as anyone, certainly any state director that I have ever seen stand up and say, what is happening is evil, this is wrong, and as a state organization, we're going to do something about it. And so I just wanted to really reiterate how proud I am of her and how proud I am of FADP and how proud I am to stand with you guys in Florida this week and beyond.
Thank you, Jeff, and I want to echo those sentiments as well. Both as somebody that's grateful to be able to work hand in hand with our allies in Florida, and also to acknowledge, and we've seen this in other states too, just how overwhelming and difficult it becomes when they have date after date after date. And that's what appears to be happening. You're getting new dates, not for months from now, but for weeks from now, almost at the time of execution. So, we're keeping you all in our prayers and our support. I want to invite everybody to make sure that if you are able, that you're sending money to Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, in addition to any other support that can be offered. I also want to note, and I say this pretty much every time we do this, the consistent thread that runs through almost every one of these executions is abuse, neglect, and addiction at childhood, impacting one way or another these people who end up on death row. That is true in almost every case, almost every execution. So I do want to note also, Abu had asked in the Q&A about, is it common for attorneys to not file anything? And for this reason, as it is in the Wainwright case, no, that is not very common. And part of the reason why Baya Harrison doesn't want to sign this appeal is because it calls him out on his own failures to represent. But that's what we've seen in other cases. For example, in Ivan Cantu's case in Texas and others, is when everything has been litigated and a lawyer files something that might be seen by the court as frivolous, they can actually be sanctioned. So we've seen a couple of instances where somebody's going to execution and there's no appeal currently before the Supreme Court because there's nothing left to file. Or in some cases, the prisoner said, I'm done, stop. So in any case, thank you all for talking about the Florida cases. I do want to note it's already half past the hour, and we're going to talk quickly about the execution in Alabama, Gregory Hunt, and then move on through Oklahoma and then Mississippi, and of course South Carolina as well. We have several other people that are planning to join us, so depending on who shows up when, we'll get to the next cases. But first, let's go back to Jeff and Esther Brown. Perhaps we should start with you, Esther, about Gregory Hunt, who is next scheduled to be executed in Alabama on June 10th.
Yes, and of course, he just like, as you were saying, a terrible childhood. Then you add terrible representation that was never brought up. He is innocent of the aggravating circumstance. And just briefly to go to Florida, I know it doesn't have anything to do with it, but I'm going to say it. In '88, I got 2 people off death row in Florida. How did I do it? I fired the attorney right at the beginning. So that's my recommendation. And then get who you want. Okay. But back to Alabama. And if you want to talk about somebody who has been rehabilitated, you can talk about Greg. He is a pastor. He has at least 20, 25 people who he ministers to. When people come to death row, they drop things off. They will say, oh, it's on single walk for the first 90 days, but then they drop off shower slides, deodorant, and things like that at the man's cell. Yeah, but this is Alabama. This is this wonderful Bible Belt, include Florida, my experience there, equally awful. He is in a good frame of mind, and he's written a long statement for the Manor Project. I hope it was probably going to be publishing in our newsletter, which comes out every 3 months. And when they can, they stop by to cell, and he talks, and it's murder. We don't, I don't even want to say execution. I call it cold-blooded murder. That's what it is. Much more cold-blooded than any of the other murders that people got there. More premeditated. There's no more premeditated murder than execution. But Jeff Hood, you're there? Maybe you would like to say something.
Yes, of course. Well, first and foremost, as I always say, Esther Brown is one of the great heroes of my life. It is unbelievable how much she has given of herself. I mean, 1988, talking about getting folks off of death row, I was 5 years old. I mean, just incredible. And I always want to make sure that she gets her flowers. With that said, I think that it is so important to speak about just the beauty of Greg. Greg is a beautiful, beautiful person. He's someone who I think has just gone from an orphan, kind of a hippie living on the streets, made an awful, awful decision that cost a young woman her life, and then found God, transformed himself. God transformed him, however you want to describe it. And for decades now has served as such an amazing presence on death row there in Alabama. I mean, he is the epicenter, the epitome of what you talk about when you talk about redemption. One of the things that he has wanted me to tell everyone that I come in contact with is, number one, that he is at peace. He believes wholeheartedly that he is going to heaven, whether it is next week or whenever it is. And he wants everyone to know from the bottom of his heart that he is at peace. On some level, almost giddy when I talk to him, which has been interesting for me to navigate a little bit. The other thing is that he wants people to know that the state of Alabama should not be left in peace, meaning that the capital charges in his case, and he is currently fighting this pro se and currently fighting this pro se in state court. But it was a sexual assault. The reason it became a capital case, the aggravating factor, was that it was also a sexual assault. Just to give a very brief description, it was claimed that they found cervical mucus on a broom handle, and they said that he sodomized her with a broom handle. Forgive the description, but it's important. The autopsy at trial proved that she didn't have a cervix. She had a hysterectomy. And so we're talking about a situation in which the state lied to get a death sentence. We know the state lied to get a death sentence. Certainly the federal defenders down there have done the absolute best that they could. And it's, when you have courts that are not interested in hearing about anything about truth, there's only sometimes so much you can do. And I understand that. But at the same time, Greg is still fighting in state court. I'll also say before I wrap it up for my time, his head attorney was John Palumbi. May he rest in peace. Tremendous man, great attorney. But that's caused him some difficulty, and I think what's the right word? I guess confusion in recent weeks in terms of handling his case and whatnot. So y'all pray for Greg. And Greg really doesn't have a whole lot of folks. He doesn't have a whole lot of family. I think he's got some pen pals, but the people that he is most close to are the 25 people who attend his church every Sunday morning. They're on death row. And so, anyways, I'm just really proud of Greg. I'm really proud of Esther too. And with such pride, I'm done.
Well, great. We're grateful, Jeff, for, we can tell how tired you are juggling all of this, and, you have our support, and we're grateful for your bringing presence of your connection with these prisoners to the world through these platforms and these opportunities. I do want to say that in Florida, we're talking about some ways to ramp up the activism, to do things a little bit differently, to be more aggressive. What that's going to end up looking like is still in discussion, but that's happening. Similarly, in Alabama, part of our challenge, of course, is we're moving into summertime when people are away. I mean, here are so many of us, even on this panel tonight, are traveling and in different places than we normally are. And that also impacts how we are able to show up on the ground in these spaces. But there'll be opportunities for people to walk with Jeff and people from Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty into the governor's office in Tallahassee on June 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and also earlier in the day at 9 a.m. in Alabama with people from Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty and other abolitionists from Alabama to walk into Governor Ivey's office at 9 a.m. Central Time. And we do that also in Oklahoma. We're going to hear about Oklahoma in just a moment, and elsewhere. We're also ramping up and looking for some additional resources with which to promote the For Whom the Bells Toll campaign, which people have different ideas about the bells and what that's about, but ultimately it's a tool to engage the faith community and others. And we're going to be trying to find ways to engage more people. There's a priest in Florida who brings a busload of people to every execution to stand outside the prison. And what if every diocese was doing that? What if that was happening in other states? What if all of our friends in Europe were to start to gather outside the U.S. Embassy at the time of an execution, or some symbolic time during the day on the day of an execution. What if? The what ifs are immeasurable, and it's up to each of us to decide, here's what we're going to do to wrap this up. And I want to be in. So connect with us. If that's what you're feeling, I want to do more. Please connect with us. We'll connect you with folks locally. We'll probably host some kind of dialogue at some point that won't be on the internet, but will be a Zoom conversation, a private one, where we can actually put all of our cards on the table and talk about what can we do to wrap these things up. So with that, the next execution on the schedule is John Hanson in Oklahoma. With us also traveling in an airport. You're our third person in an airport tonight, Reverend Dickerson. Welcome, and this is Reverend Sherry Dickerson from Oklahoma to share a little bit about what's happening there around the execution of John Hanson.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that you all can hear me pretty good. As Abe just said, I am currently sitting in the middle of Atlanta at Hartsfield Airport. So I listen to the stories, and I am aware we always try to support Oklahoma. We try to support all of our other sister cities that are dealing with this atrocity. And we're trying to continue to fight against the machine of state-sanctioned violence that happens far too often in Oklahoma. Mr. Hanson was literally serving a federal sentence, and Oklahoma was so adamant about murdering him. They had him extradited back to Oklahoma. So there's so many ways that is the absurdity of it all, right? The inhumanity, and even we argued it was fiscally irresponsible to put all of those resources into an issue that had already been resolved. Mr. Hanson has a lot of the health and mental illnesses that many of those who are unfairly tried because of those deficits on death row. And so it's astonishing, it's disappointing, it is exhausting.
I think we can still hear you.
Okay, and it's also just, it's disgusting and heartbreaking, right? So I have not had the pleasure of forming a rapport, even a rapport with John, because he's only been back in Oklahoma just enough time for them to deny clemency, and then decide the date which they are going to literally murder him, which is in 11 days, June 12th. So my brain can't always contain it. What to do. I feel so ineffective and hopeless in this sense that I don't even get the opportunity or the privilege to be able to offer ministry or support to him, and even his family, who are trying to wrap their minds around what has happened. And it just came out of the blue. They were not expecting this grotesque action to happen. So everything that I could say is what I always say. We have to keep doing the work to abolish this abhorrent practice. We have to try to support each other as best we can. And we have to let our brothers and sisters who are on the road know that we are not going to stop fighting for them, and that their life has value and meaning. And it is a privilege to be able to advocate on their behalves, even though we shouldn't have to in this capacity. Um, thank you all for the work that you all do. Uh, please continue to keep John and his family covered in prayer, or whatever your faith practice is. Um, know that he has resigned to the fact that it is going to happen. And I was just told this by one of the other ministers in Oklahoma that's had the opportunity to just speak with him once. And we've just let him know that if there's anything that we can do, and anything that he would want us to do in supporting his family, we certainly we will, as we always do. So hopefully, um, sometime soon in the very near future, even with the craziness of this administration, we will see success and victory around the abolition of the death penalty.
Amen. Well, thank you for making time for us, Reverend Dickerson, all the way from the airport there in Atlanta. I'm just grateful for your presence, both on the vigils and also tonight. I do want to add just a bit about John. As
Can I say
Reverend
something real
Dickerson.
quick?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I neglected to say that Oklahoma is so biased and in their decisions on death penalty cases. And as there's a disparaging amount all across this nation, but definitely in Oklahoma, of Black, brown, and poor people. Those are the ones that get these harsh, inhumane sentences. And Oklahoma, where today is the day that we commemorate one of the worst massacres that happened in this nation, the Black Wall Street, the Tulsa Massacre, the Greenwood Massacre. And none of those people who took over 100 lives, none of them were ever brought to trial, were ever convicted. And so the unfairness of the devaluing of the lives of people in melanated skin is also something that we have to continue to speak out about. Off my soapbox.
Well, thank you for raising that. And I want to add to that. It's not only is it this, we see a greater proportion of people of color facing execution, but also it turns out that of the last 37 executions, which is all the executions in 2024 and 2025 so far, only 7 had victims who were people of color. In other words, out of 37 executions, 30 of them were for the murder of white people. And white people, are the victims of violent crime about half the time. About half the time than people of color. But what the statistics bear out is that when the victim is white, they're much more likely to seek and get a death sentence. And that is true in about 80% of all the people executed since we started in 1977 have had, they've been there for the murder of white people. And that's another part of that disparity. As to John Hanson, I just want to mention there's 2 things. One is, here's another guy with major mental illness, brain damage, autism, conditions that contributed to his participation in a crime. I've actually spoken on the phone with Victor Miller, who is thought to be the actual killer in this case and the ringleader of the crime, and had a long history of manipulating Mr. Hanson. Mr. Miller is contacting me about another Oklahoma case that he's trying to help that guy get clemency. And it's just so odd that, of course, the actual killer in this case, here it is again, is doing a life sentence. not a death sentence. And here's John Hanson about to be executed. The other thing about John is that if you watched his clemency hearing, which they unfortunately, I don't know that there's a way to get the recordings of them, but so when the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board has its meetings, you can watch live on via Zoom, connected through the Pardon and Parole Board's webpage. And so I was watching, and the way they do it is you hear from the defense, then you hear from the prosecutors, then you hear from the victim's family, then you hear from the prisoner. Then there's Q&A and a little bit of dialogue, and the board goes out of the room, comes back, and then votes publicly. There are 5 members of that board, and the vote was 3-2. One of the challenges that's been issued, and I don't know if anything has come of this yet, but one of the challenges is that one of those members should have recused himself. That's the argument that's being made, asking that he get a new clemency hearing. So I'm not sure where that stands right now. But the other thing was that one of the 2 people that voted for clemency was visibly upset when the vote happened. He literally he had to say, wait, I want to make a comment before they had the vote. And then you could see him, I have a screenshot of it somewhere, clutching his briefcase in his lap, waiting to make his comment. And he was so upset, I think, by what was happening and how it was happening, and the fact that the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board, as is the case in almost all the states, is basically set up to be a rubber stamp gatekeeper for the governor, to keep the governor from getting a recommendation for clemency. And that's the situation that I wanted to share about John Hanson. So I see David Estrada is there watching on the Facebook. Hello, David. David is our man on the spot who lives in McAllister, where the prison is. And often when we are bringing you to the prison, it's through David's phone. We're grateful that you're with us tonight, David. So thank you. And now we don't have anybody here from South Carolina yet, and maybe they'll show up, but we'll skip straight over to not Alabama, Mississippi, where we haven't had an execution in a few years now, and suddenly we do. Mitzi Magleby is going to talk about this, and Art Cody as well. I'll just say that that this is another unnecessary execution of an 80-year-old person who should be receiving mercy purely because of his service to our country. And the other thing that is so startling to everybody I tell this to, has been there for 49 years. He was sentenced to death in 1976. We don't need to be killing these people. So welcome, Mitzi and Art Cody. Let's go with Mitzi first to share a little bit, and then we'll hear from Art. Mitzi, you were there in front of the state Supreme Court with us last week when we did a press conference, and thank you for your leadership there in Mississippi. Please let us know what's happening. How can people help?
Well, we just need to get this man off to not die. It's astounding that he was sentenced to death 4 times. He was sentenced to death, overturned, sentenced to death, overturned. He got off death row for several years one time and was an asset to the prison, and was a trusted inmate, drove a tractor, worked, did all the things that he needed to do. It also needs to be noted that Mr. Jordan, Richard Jordan is his name, has never received a rule violations report in 49 years of his being in prison. He is a very compliant. He very kind. I was talking to a death row inmate last week, and he told me, he said, Richard Jordan's only a threat to Richard Jordan because he gets up and works all day, and that's what he does. He was married about 1.5 years ago to a wonderful woman, and it's just really sad. He's a kind man. We need to show him grace. In fact, I have on my phone, if I can get it, I don't know if you can see it, a picture of him cutting the cake with his wife that they got to get married
That's on death row.
on death row.
Wow, they allowed
They
that. That's amazing.
they allowed it. It was when we had more of a champion deputy superintendent for the death row inmates. He was allowing them to have classes, grow gardens, take music lessons, have book clubs, all kind of things. And he allowed Mr. Jordan to get married. I know when I visited death row, um, he we were talking about our group, the inmates on death row, Mississippi death row named our group Leaders for Life. That was what they came up with. And I remember sitting there talking with them saying, well, let's get some things together so I can post for us. And he was so proud. He walked up to me with his wedding pictures and he said, please post this for me. And just kind, gentle man. And he he's a Vietnam veteran. He's very, very well spoken, very remorseful for what he did. And I believe that he is what I said in the press conference. He is the poster child for rehabilitation because he has really reformed and reshaped himself to a person that obeys all the rules. He's very compliant, very well mannered, very calm, and I believe we should show him grace, especially for his service to our country. And
Thank
this
you.
will be June 25th at 6 o'clock at Parchman. And I do want to say one more thing, that when he got sentenced to the death penalty, the last time he got sentenced to it, he had been off of death row and working. And when they took him back for a resentence, the prosecutor had the audacity to say that he only worked and was good for self enhancement, that he was getting to live the good life in prison. And if anybody knows Parchman, I think you've seen probably documentaries on Parchman. Anywhere in Parchman is not the good life, but that's how they labeled him, as being self serving, trying to live the good life, and just to get off of death row. So that was kind of comical to me that the that they swayed the hearing that way to say that he was self-serving and just wanted to live a good life in Parchman, of all places.
Thank you, Mitzi. Let's
Thank
bring up
you.
Art Cody, retired U.S. Navy captain and director of the Center for Veteran Criminal Advocacy. Art, thanks for joining us again. We're glad you're with us.
Sure. Thanks very much. And Mitzi, I think you're absolutely right. Having visited Richard on Parchman's death row, you're not living the good life there, regardless of what part of Parchman you're on. And I think the thing to remember with Richard in particular, and all my cases are veteran cases. I think commonly the veteran experience, particularly if it involves combat, is just not widely understood or appreciated, particularly the effects that it has on the on the individual, by the people who did the sentencing or who are involved in the appeals and in moving this forward towards execution. From my conversations with Mr. Jordan, as well as looking at his records, he was involved in the Vietnam conflict at a particularly dangerous time. And his job, which was a door gunner on a helicopter, was particularly dangerous and also particularly traumatic in that he is shooting at people on the ground. And commonly, it was difficult for them to determine whether what target they're hitting, what target they're not hitting. In the throes of the Vietnam War, and certainly his return to the United States, they weren't treated that they were not treated particularly well. and that was never really brought out at Richard's trial and subsequent appeals. So here you have a situation where we send people into a combat zone, particularly we send them, in the case of Vietnam, we send them into a very uncertain conflict, and a very dangerous conflict, and then we expect them to come back without any form of mental health injury, which is not the case with Richard. He certainly did have mental health injury. And again, to me, this is an example where Richard, to some degree, is paying the price for our lack of understanding and our failure to account for that. Were it not for the fact that he went to Vietnam and our nation sent him to Vietnam and put him in this position and asked him to do certain things, he would not be in the situation he's in. So in my mind, but and again, you have to factor in the age as well. Is this really the kind of person that we want to execute?
Thank you, Art. I want to invite you also. You told us recently around the Jeff Hutchinson case, the last veteran that was executed in Florida. You talked about how about 10% of the people on death rows in the United States are veterans. And, I don't know if there's any veteran advocacy being built around this case for Richard. Maybe you can address that as well. But how can we do a better job of mobilizing around these particular cases? Do you have any ideas for us on that?
Well, I think one of the things to look at, and I know we're working on this in Florida and we're working on this in Nevada as well, is to work with veterans, almost as a whole, like as a national group, not necessarily saying, hey, Mississippi veterans or Nevada veterans or Florida veterans, but just veterans as a whole, because I think veterans share this common experience, regardless of geometry or geography. I think that in individual states, certainly you can reach out to the local the VFWs, the American Legion, and try to mobilize them. But I think there are efforts that are going on nationally. They just have not reached fruition yet, where we have um, somewhat of a quick reaction force where we can bring veterans in to say, hey, I'm a vet and I oppose this execution. We're not there yet. We're working on it.
Super. Well, thank you, Art. Mitzi and Art, are there anything besides signing the petition and being ready to call the governor and all of that? Is there any other activities planned around this case that people can be involved in and engage with?
That's all. Mississippi is a strange animal. I have people saying, we'll help, we'll help, we'll help. But then when time comes, I show up. Me. So it's kind of hard, especially with the death penalty. I have a lot of people on one of my justice pages, and they're good with that until I start talking about showing up for the death penalty, and they say they don't want the hate that comes with it. But I wish everybody would please sign the petition that you have up. I need all the help I can get. I feel like I'm fighting this semi alone and down here, and call the governor who seems to have no heart, but we're hoping he grows one, and that he won't put an 80-year-old man strapped down to a table and end his life, especially after he's done for our country and for basically what he does for the prison. He works, and I beg people to please get involved. Please help us.
Well, thank you, Mitzi. And, I will say we've had, I think, some very fair coverage from news media agencies in Mississippi, and that's kind of common. Any reporter that starts to look at this will have the same sort of experience that anybody in general, myself included, who doesn't know where maybe I used to be in favor of the death penalty. I didn't really know much about it. But the more you learn about it, and the more you see these particular injustices that are exhibited in each of these cases, the harder it is to stand by and justify it. So if nothing else, when we're reaching tens of thousands of people through the media work that we're doing with you and others in Mississippi, and as we try to find people to stand up and do something, Mississippi is one of those states that's been really, really hard to organize in, and yet there are people that call and say, what can I do and how can I help? And it's not always showing up in person, but for those who are able to, it really makes a big difference. And again, we generally have a good experience with media figuring out how to make a handful of people look like a crowd. So with that, I want to thank Art. Any final thoughts around the Mississippi execution, and then we'll address the upcoming South Carolina execution.
I just think it's important to keep in mind that when you think about veterans, particularly combat veterans, we have to understand that a great deal of the reason that they're on death row is because they did precisely what no one else in the country wanted to do, but that the country asked them to do. And there's absolutely a realization at the highest levels of government that I think throughout the American populace actually, but certainly in government, that when we send, 1,000, 10,000, whatever number of folks we send overseas, they're not going to come back the same. Because what we ask them to do, what they see, what they do, what they experience, the fear, the trauma, etc. And Richard is one of many, one of 10% on death row who have gone through that experience. And the idea of executing people with mental health issues resultant from combat, the way I like to think about it is service connected, is in the VA's, in the Veterans Administration's words, is decidedly unfair, and to me is very much an Eighth Amendment kind of issue where it's cruel and unusual to put veterans, combat veterans, with mental health issues to death, knowing that they would not be there but for the fact that we asked them to go and they raised their hand, volunteered, and went.
And came home with an injury that was severe but maybe unseen.
Correct.
In addition to whatever actual physical injuries they have. Andrea in the chat is just applauding the strategy you outlined, and also just wondering if before we get to the point of a veteran being executed, what if there were more awareness raised around these issues and the abandonment of veterans and the trauma that they've endured. And I know that is something that lots of groups are trying to work on, just to raise the awareness about veteran suicide and veterans being left to fend for themselves and all of this. So I think it's a question that is more rhetorical than anything else, but give you another opportunity to talk about the advocacy, and maybe that's a place for us to find a way to start organizing or to support you in your organizing when in terms of outreach to other veterans organizations and trying to interest them in at least being aware of and maybe commenting on these executions of veterans.
I think there's a couple things going on. One, with a lot of the veterans organizations, particularly the more national ones, it is difficult to get them on board as a whole. Because and the individuals is different. To get individual veterans on board it's not easy, but it's certainly more. They tend to be more responsive than say like the VFW, the American Legion. I mean, locally you might be able to do it. I think the problem is that a lot of times, nationally, the American Legion, VFW, etc., Vietnam Veterans of America tend to be a little more conservative. And so there's kind of this idea that, yeah, we're for vets. We're absolutely, very dedicated to getting their veterans, to getting their benefits until such time as they break the law. And I think what goes wrong there is the lack of realization that there's still veterans, and the reason they're breaking the law, the reason they're going to the other side of the law is because of the injuries they suffered. It's just a different manifestation of the same symptoms, and that's something that can be a little bit of a tough nut to crack. Um, I can say that what I have seen in my work in advocacy for veterans is when the veterans history, and particularly the veterans combat history and the veterans mental health history is presented to a court or a prosecutor, the results tend to be much different. And I think the more we put this forward, the more we talk to prosecutors, and the more we get this issue at the forefront, the more likely it is that veterans will get a more realistic acknowledgement and assessment of the effects of combat on them. So, what I would say is certainly, we're trying to do it at all the trial levels when we're going through trial in the different states. And the earlier you start, certainly the better off you are to try to what I think of as derailing the death train before it gets too far along. But in terms of if you're in a state and you have a client like in Mitzi's situation, then I think you're probably better off going locally than you are trying to go with the national organizations. And in particularly if you can appeal to people who have been in the same or in the same demographic, the same genre, the same conflicts as your client has been in, then I think you're much more likely to get a more sympathetic audience.
Thank you. I want to note in the chat, Michael is suggesting groups like Veterans for Peace and engaging with folks like that, of course. And then Melvin is agreeing as a Vietnam veteran, feeling that American Legion and VFW are conservative organizations that might be harder to crack into. But Ali is sharing the petition for Richard again in the chat. And thanks, everybody. Thank you, Art and Mitzi, for being present with us tonight and for all that you're doing to try to stop this execution. Art, I do want to say that part of what you're describing is the vital organizing that needs to take place at the time of as soon as a person is arrested after a crime, is really start to work with the prosecutor to figure out how can we address this case and get justice for everybody without a death sentence even being sought, and raising these issues earlier when it's possible. And that's a challenge and takes a lot of community organizing. And for many of us, it's a whole different strategy that takes resources and time and people focused on that. But we've done that in a number of cases around the country where real efforts are made to organize in the community and have community leaders reach out to prosecutors ahead of a charging time, ahead of an indictment, ahead of going to trial, to try to say, can we deal with this without seeking the death penalty?
Yeah, and I think Michael's suggestion of reaching out to veterans, smaller veterans organizations like say Veterans for Peace or Plowshares, some of the more what I would think of progressive or enlightened veterans groups can get you better results than trying to go to the big national, what I think is somewhat monolithic organizations that tend to be more law enforcement oriented and tend to be more conservative.
Thank you, Art, very much. We're grateful for you and for Mitzi being with us tonight. And now we're going to shift and talk about the last execution that we haven't talked about yet in the month of June. Ali, go ahead.
Yeah, I just saw that Margaret had her hand raised. I just wanted to give Margaret an opportunity to put her question in the chat in case she didn't see the message.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Ali and Margaret. So let me just share my screen and we'll look at the petitions again. And this is where we can get to the case of Stephen Stanko, the next person to be executed in South Carolina on June 13th. It's a Friday, 2 weeks from Friday, this past Friday, I should say. So less than 2 weeks away. And what we know is that this is another case where you've got brain damage from multiple brain injuries and a troubled birth, and apparently brain damage resulted in tissue loss to the frontal lobe, and medical brain structures that place him in the bottom 2.4% of the population. This does not excuse the crime, but it helps us understand and mitigate some of that, and that's where we need to just keep raising these issues. And I also want to note, let me just get over here. I haven't had a chance to address this one yet, but at scadp.org, that stands for South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, scadp.org. I'm going to get there in a second. There we go. That's where you'll find also the campaign around Stephen Stanko. Lots more information that's available to you, and to be engaged with these folks. They've got a whole organizing kit. There's a petition. There's an advocacy campaign that's coming. And of course, they'll be preparing for vigil information. And I will say that on Friday, it was announced that Stephen has chosen to be executed by lethal injection. Not surprising in a way, given that it turns out that the last firing squad execution in South Carolina, only two out of the three shooters, one appears to have missed entirely, and the other two were off target, meaning that the man executed bled out over the course of a minute and a half or more, as opposed to being dead within seconds, which is what should happen when fragmentation bullets hit your heart directly, for whatever reason. And we still don't have any real answer from the state or the prison department in South Carolina about how this came to be. But when they're going to do firing squad and then they miss, either that's purposeful. Well, it has to be purposeful, because how are they putting anybody on a firing squad who can't hit a target with a rifle from 15 feet away? I can do that, and I've never been trained to shoot. And I mean, it's just startling that happened. In any case, we've got 2 weeks until that execution. Typically in South Carolina, the petitions will be delivered 1 or 2 days prior to. Just going to look real quick and see if they've announced. Yes, so on the 12th of June, there will be a petition delivery at 11 a.m. at the State House, vigil of remembrance that evening, 7 p.m., and then the execution vigil will start outside of Broad River Correctional Facility at 4:30 p.m. until the execution is announced that it's over, and that execution is scheduled for 6 p.m. Eastern Time on June 13th. So with that, are there any other questions that we can address about any of these cases? I'm looking in the chat. You can also use the Q&A. Abu is suggesting that the execution was botched because the target was misplaced. And if that's true, then same thing. I mean, I don't know. We don't know exactly what happened there. But the fact is that it happened, and it's crazy. And it's also crazy, if you'll pardon that terminology, that in South Carolina, you have to choose how you're going to be killed. Electric chair, lethal injection, firing squad. Most states, there's a default way, and it probably is in South Carolina too, but at the end of the day, that's just one more bit of the torture. They have to weigh which way is going to be easier to die, or how do I want to die, how, et cetera, et cetera. So that's part of the insanity of that. Let's see one question here. Any chance there could be an electrocution in South Carolina? Yes, the answer to that is, and Alia had something to add to that, but ultimately, we'll see an electrocution as soon as somebody chooses. And I will tell you that in Tennessee, up until the positive executions, that was 5 years ago, prisoners mostly were choosing the electric chair. because it had been learned that lethal injection is dangerously close to waterboarding, to being tortured to death, suffocated in a different way than gas suffocation. And we didn't even get into the gas suffocation plan for Gregory Hunt in Alabama, which is just another indicator that that's become normal. Allie, did you want to add something?
No, I didn't have anything else to add.
Okay, sorry for jumping the gun on that one. So I do want to say also that at the end of this month, many of us, dozens at least, and probably more at this point, I haven't seen the registrations, but the annual fast and vigil to abolish the death penalty will commence on the evening of June 28th. We gather and then we circle up at the U.S. Supreme Court at 12 a.m. on the morning of June 29th, the anniversary of the Furman decision, which struck down all the death penalty laws in the country in 1972, forcing states that wanted to have a death penalty to write new laws, and those new laws were upheld with the Gregg decision on July 2nd, 1976. And that's how we came to these dates for the annual fast and vigil to abolish the death penalty at the U.S. Supreme Court, June 29th to July 2nd. If you're going to do the whole thing, come to D.C. on June 28th and join us for our final meal that we have in the evening before we all gather at the U.S. Supreme Court. And then you don't have to fast, or you can make a fast out of your own. It's become my annual fast to do just water only, but if you just give up smoking or chocolate or something else, if you can't actually fast. Many people can't fast for whatever reason, but it's not about that. What it's about is being present. And what's amazing this year is the number of new folks that have told us that they're coming. Student groups actually coming to be present with us. This will be a first. They're using up most of our cheap beds at the Quaker House, so it's going to be interesting to see how all this comes together. But it's at abolition.org. Allie has put the link in the chat. June 29th to July 2nd, really the 28th, go home on the 3rd of July. And it's a very powerful experience and an opportunity to be together with numerous other people committed to ending executions, many people who have direct personal experience in the issue, either as victim family members, death row family members, death row survivors. We're hoping to have Gary Drinkert, who is the new chair of the Board of Witness to Innocence, the organization of exonerated death row survivors. Will be there, among others, Shane Claiborne, Professor Rick Halpern, and a number of other folks. And we'll be streaming those as well, those presentations, to the best of the technology allows. And yes, Joan will also be sharing out information about how you can engage in the fasting, or however you want to engage, even if you can't be with us in person at the U.S. Supreme Court. So those are the things that are coming up. And then hopefully we will continue to have a really slow July. Let me just look back at the schedule for a moment. Currently, there are no executions scheduled in July, and let's hope that it continues to be that way. We only have one execution scheduled in August so far. That's in Tennessee. By the way, on the Sunday before August 5th, which is a Thursday, so I think it's August 1st or 2nd. Yeah, I think it's the 1st. We'll be marching again from the prison to the state capitol in Nashville. So that's another opportunity to put your feet on the ground with us together. And then only one execution scheduled so far in Texas in September and in Tennessee in December. I'm certain that execution schedule is going to fill out and increase, but hopefully I'm wrong about that. Meanwhile, we also have to be watching this cabal of red state attorneys generals and governors who are trying to expand the death penalty, passing legislation that brings the death penalty for non-homicides, child molestation, and that sort of thing. It's passed in a number of states now: Arkansas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, of course, and others are talking about that. More states are expanding their methods of execution. Although we were able to stop that bill, the folks in North Carolina were able to stop that in North Carolina. We're going to see where the conversation goes in Ohio. and on and on. There's so much happening, so much to do, and our movement right now is very much in a defensive posture, even as the attorneys in most of these cases are doing everything they can to try to put a halt to the execution for their particular clients. So with that, Ali or Art, is there anything more that we need to share before we close it down for tonight? Okay, well, with that, Ali, do we have a closing video to take us out?
I did not get one ready. Which one are you thinking?
No, let's just do this. I'm going to come up to and show everybody where you can find this. If you get to the front page of Death Penalty Action, and then scroll down all the way down to the bottom, and that's where you can find, I should mention, our campaign to raise a lot of money to keep us going. Looks like I've got a bit of a slow signal. Here we go. But this is the kind of stuff that we're doing, and here is where you can find the videos of the people versus the death penalty, the people who have direct experience on this. Hopefully we won't get too slow with my out in the middle of the desert. But Charles Keith was going to call in tonight. He's been ill. He is on the Death Penalty Action team as our Impacted Communities Liaison, and here is a little bit about him. And make it a great evening, and thanks for being with us tonight.
Well, I had a brother that was on death row back in 1994. He spent 16 years on death row. Took me a lot of time to figure out how to get him out. I learned a lot about the law. I learned a lot about the death penalty, and getting him off death row in 2010. And it also gave me the skills to come out here and help others that were on death row that needed my help. The death penalty drove me crazy, but it's a crazy goodness because I learned so much about the law. Governor Strickland took him off death row based on an innocent claim. They gave him life without parole, and I've been fighting life without parole for the past 12 years. Without a father, I was obligated. I mean, I got pushed into it. I never even thought about being a father figure because I was always a big brother. And now coming through something like this, I had to be more than a big brother. I had to actually go out and fight like this was my kid. And I lacked knowledge and awareness about the death penalty, so I started studying law books. I said, I got to read the same books that the lawyers are reading so I can understand the language, the lingo, what's going on, and I have to prepare myself for this long haul of fighting the death penalty. And I tell people I wasn't educated by Ohio State. I was educated by the state of Ohio. There's no rules in this game, and there's no manual that you can go how to fight the death penalty. We don't get that as laymen, so to speak. Lawyers may get it, but we don't. So we have to learn to fight in such a different way.
We're here today with our message, standing in solidarity as a people.
This is what democracy looks like!
This is about my 5th time coming down here, and each time there has been an execution. It's painful each time because you know you're taking of a life, and that person has family.
There's going to be another murder taking place, another legal lynching.
I think about the people, the workers on the other side. I mean, we over here, we're witnesses, we're abolitionists, we're against it, but those on the other side are part of it. In order to sit on a death penalty case, you have to be for the death penalty. So imagine you've got 12 people sitting there that's for the death penalty. You're most surely going to be convicted because the prosecutor is for the death penalty. So he's using you to make sure he gets a conviction. It's like you're going up against a lynch mob.
What do we want? Abolition. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Abolition.
We must abolish the death penalty.
The racism of this nation draws a direct line from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration to the death penalty. And the death penalty is, simply put, a legalized modern-day version of lynching.
And when you look at the government, see, they're killing in the name of the church. And that's why we've taken our fight to the church. That's why we've asked the pastors to come out. This is wrong. This is thou shalt not kill.
Indeed, the death penalty can only be abolished when the bloodthirsty among us, the church, lose our addiction to death and murder.
We're in a space where we have a Supreme Court that doesn't care. The rails have been greased to the death chamber, and that's what we're seeing now.
We must not allow this wicked system to shed any more blood in our names.
God gave us life. It's sacred. How can you take away anybody's life when you would not want that to happen to you also?
Are you fatigued by any of this?
Yes, I'm beat down. You know, I started this at the age of 34. I'm 64 now. And, you know, so many things have happened, but they didn't think it was going to get this far, this deep. They don't think families, poor families such as myself, the Reeds, the Joneses, and those folks, they don't think we're going to come out and fight. How could we? How would we know how?
They all deserve life.
You're trying to save a person's life. It's a lot different than, you know, you see a person in a car or you see him drowning. You got opportunity. I told my brother I would never, you know, abandon him.